man, for this plot we wanted to write anyway, we have to change these things to make it make sense. Disastrous way of making a show, by the way. Especially Star Trek. This is the plot we wanted to write. Spock switches body was to Pring. How can we make that happen? Well, I watched this movie called Star Trek 3, and they had this thing called Katra. Yeah, we can do that. This isn't Amok Time, this is Spock Amok. There's a point to it being backwards, you see. We're going to get into that in a moment. This episode was fun at face value, and then once logic takes its place in the mind palace, you start to realize a lot of bizarre problems. Okay, on the surface, this episode works very well. It's fun. It's decidedly witty. But you're stepping on a lot of lore, okay? And I don't mean Data's brother. It's one thing to make small continuity retcons, mistakes, errors, sometimes purely out of ignorance. But it's another thing entirely to seemingly willfully walk on previously established lore. And you're walking on the lore of a fan-favorite character. And a fan-favorite species, I might add. That being the Vulcans and Spock. How does that happen? We're going to find out in a moment. But this is episode 5, halfway point for Strange New World Season 1, I think. Have they said how many episodes this season is going to have? Is it going to have 10 like Picard? Who knows? Sorry to bring up Picard, but this is Strange New Worlds. Let's do it how we do it. And how we do it is we break down our A or B, possibly our C plot, and then we go from there. So we're going to have the blow-by-blow and what I thought about it. Right off the bat, I'd like to say that the acting in this episode is very good. One thing you'll notice about all the modern Trek shows, actually, is that the acting is not always spot on in these shows. Discovery, in my opinion, being the worst in that front. This is now the best, in my opinion. I think Pike, Mbenga, Chapel, Spock, they're firing on all cylinders, I must say. They know how to act physically, verbally, and they know when to pepper in quips here and there without going really overboard, but that's more the writer's fault. Some episodes are better than others. Some feel more like Kelvin. Some feel more like classic Trek. On the whole, it's not perfect, but a key player for me is Mbenga. Mbenga, in the few scenes he had this episode, admittedly, he's shown to us and then immediately thrown away. He manages to do so much with so little. He seems so fun. He seems vibrant. He seems alive. And I was disappointed to not get much of him in this episode. He goes on a little mini fishing trip, and I would have been happy if we spent the entire episode on a fishing trip with Mbenga. Maybe some other episode we can go back to Starbase and fish around in that artificial lake with Mbenga and have a good time, but for this episode, he kind of just goes fishing alone. With that out of the way, let's see what's going on in plot A, shall we? Well, plot A more or less plays out like a typical diplomatic negotiation. There's this new species called the Rongovians, who I thought looked really cool, acted really cool, and kept me engaged for every scene they were in. You'll notice that the A plot we have here is my favorite part of this episode. In fact, as this episode goes on, it gets a little bit worse. It turns more and more into a cartoon as it goes on, but the A plot remains strong throughout. What are we going to do with the Rongovians? Well, they occupy a key strategic territory for the Federation that is between Romulan and Klingon space. We're just after the Klingon War. We need to rebuild ties with frontier territories to shore up Federation defense and security. So the Rongovians are key to that. What's interesting about the Rongovians, we discover? Well, the Rongovians diplomatic and negotiation tactic is to use empathy. What that eventually ends up meaning is that they take on the demeanor of whoever they're arguing with in order to get into their mind. We discover later on they're looking for people who are willing to get into their mind. And switching minds, being in someone else's mind, empathy, is the core theme of this episode. This episode hits on its theme very, very well. This episode is a concept episode, essentially, on what it would mean to truly be in someone else's mind. And any good negotiator can do that. A bad negotiator can negotiate for what they want and never consider what their opponent wants. A good negotiator, like, say, Pike, knows how to get into the mind of their opponent, if you will, and see things their way. Do the cost-benefit analysis, you see. Not everything is purely good. Most things are a compromise. And a good negotiator understands that. The Rongovians are logical when talking to Vulcans, reasonable when talking to humans, and very, very rude when talking to Tellarites, we'll say. If you know Tellarites, they tend to be rude, but that's neither here nor there. So what you learn from that is that they weren't lying when they said their species was known for empathy. They can act like their opponent. And in all their searching throughout space to find worthy cooperators, they were looking for someone who was willing to do that back. And Pike does it at the end of this episode. But I'll get into that in a moment. In all of our discussions with the Rongovians, Uhura is present. I'm not sure why. I have a sneaking suspicion that she had a scene that was cut, because she just sits around and reacts awkwardly to things, and doesn't really say anything of consequence. I don't know why Uhura should be there. She's a cadet on contact training. I don't know how that qualifies you to be at the same chair as Spock and Pike in a high stakes diplomatic negotiation, but there she is. I suppose it would have been better if she had a scene where she actually did something, but she didn't really, because it was cut. Just a hunch. Speaking of hunches, Pike's tactic to just tell the Rongovians exactly what you would think you shouldn't say was operating on a hunch. A hunch that he should have probably discussed with Robert April first. Something of this amount of import should probably be discussed with other admirals, at least April. But what Pike manages to do is operate on the opinion that, like I said before, they're looking for people as empathic, maybe not the right word, people of as high level of empathy as they are. He simply tells them, listen, you have no good reason to be in the Federation. You have every reason to doubt us. Any war that you get into will probably be because of us. And you're starting to think that it might not be worth it to be in the Federation. That's genius. Because what happens is that they realize someone was actually telling them the truth. I hate to generalize with Klingons and Romulans, but the episode seems to indicate that they wouldn't do that. Spock is involved with these negotiations as well, which I'll get into when we cover our B-plot. But, at the end of the day, the Rongovians fly away on their solar sailor, which looked very cool, by the way, flying the Federation flag. So we did a very, very good job with our A-plot. If we take that at face value, and if that was the entire episode, this would be my favorite episode so far. No fighting, no anger, no intense lying, no deep-cut lore catastrophes like we're about to see in the next piece of this review. But we all come away happy. What more can you ask for? Well, you can ask for a B-plot that isn't very good. Our B-plot involves Spock, and this is played off as being the main plot in this episode, even though I don't think it is. Our episode starts off with a dream sequence from Spock, which I really loved. It was Spock fighting his Vulcan side, essentially we have human Spock and Vulcan Spock fighting in Caliphate. Vulcan ritual combat. Watch TOS for more information. And they're fighting each other with Lurpas, which is a classical Vulcan weapon. It's a staff with a weight on one end and a crescent-shaped blade on the other. Very cool. I always really liked them. And you see they're fighting. And this is showing Spock's internal turmoil between his human side and his Vulcan side. And how does that playing with T'Pring? His fiancée, T'Pring, is also on the starbase as well. She has a ulterior motive, I guess you could say. She wants to spend time with Spock, but really she's there to capture a Vulcan called Barajan, who is a Vulcan logic apostate. That is, a Vulcan who does not believe in logic. They say he was responsible for some uprising, but they didn't exactly say if it was violent or lethal. I left this whole plot wondering if Barajan was really a criminal. They didn't really go into it very much. All they said was uprising. What does that mean? Was it worth punching him? We'll get into that. You see, T'Pring is similar to Spock, trying to balance work life and social life. Okay? So, their relationship is on the rocks, you could say. They do an impromptu catric transfer in order to get into the mind of their spouse. Never mind the fact that we're totally disregarding TOS here. Spock shouldn't be seeing T'Pring until the time of their marriage. I am this close to just having to accept this show as not a prequel to TOS. It just breaks too much of it. And we'll get into that more later. The more egregious breaks with canon, we'll say. So far, I just have to treat this as its own show now. I was looking forward to something that could maybe be considered a prequel to TOS, disregarding the visuals. But the more I see T'Pring, the more I'm reminded of how poorly this fits with previously established logic, we'll say. I was beginning to forget about T'Pring after she was erroneously shown with Spock in the first episode. Now she's back, and with a catric transfer no less. I guess this is something Vulcans can just do now on the fly to get to better know each other. But what happens is they make some kind of mistake, an egregious mistake that involves them seemingly permanently transferring brains with each other. That's right, T'Pring is now in possession of Spock's brain, and vice versa. Or Catra. So what we have is bordering on a comedy of errors, and you might really think this is fun. I didn't really enjoy it that much. I would have rathered a mind transfer between two non-Vulcans, that'd be funny, or Spock and somebody else, or T'Pring and Pike, something hilarious like that. But for what it's worth, for narrative reasons, I understand why they did it. I just think it was wrong. So, you'll notice that Spock now has to engage with the Rongovians. Spock is the only person he will talk to. Now Spock is being possessed, if you will, by T'Pring. So, in a sense, they learn to partake in each other's lives, you see. Asking the question, if a relationship is on the rocks with whoever you were in a relationship with, if we could switch bodies, switch lives with each other for just a moment, how much better would we understand each other, right? An interesting question to ask. One that's not so interesting to watch. Spock, or T'Pring, has to engage in negotiations with the Rongovians, making a litany of mistakes, acting not Spock-like. Remember, the Rongovians want people to tell the truth. Spock cannot tell the truth because Spock is not Spock. He is interrupted by Pike in the worst moment of the episode, I think, apart from something that comes later. Pike just gives a Discovery-style pep talk to Spock. He just says, listen, you're everything that's right with the Federation, you're so cool, and I love you, and ha ha ha, aren't you great? Ugh. I don't want to see any more Discovery-style pep talks. Stop saying people are great and just have me believe it. You have to make them great. Make them do great things. Okay? But T'Pring, which we know is Spock, is now tasked with bringing in the Vulcan logic renegade, okay, Barjan, and he's on the space station with them. He's down seemingly near where Mbenga is fishing, in the lake spot. Cool looking visuals. I wish I was there right now, to be honest with you, instead of cooped up in here in this rickety old rust bucket. Sorry. What follows is a conversation about the weighing the benefits of logic to the cost. I came here with every intention of rehabilitation. Barjan says every intention of welcoming myself back into the faith of logic, if you will. But Spock, in the body of T'Pring, accompanied by Nurse Chapel, in a frightening break with logic, succeeds only in proving Barjan's theory that logic is limited, because T'Pring, being Spock, just resorts to violence. T'Pring just clocks Barjan over the head, punches him. I guess Barjan was right. I guess logic is no good after all. Here we have someone who is supposed to be a vanguard of logic, looking to bring somebody back into the realm of logic, punching them in the head. Did anyone find this funny? It's illogical, pun intended, and it's not very funny, and it's not very amusing, and it didn't look very believable for T'Pring to punch this guy, who, by the way, looked a lot like Leland from Discovery Season 2, onto the ground, and then afterwards say, let's not say how we captured Barjan, okay? Let's keep it between us, okay? Just me and you, me and Nurse Chapel here. Let's not tell anybody. That's the end of that story. Yep. Uh-oh. There's like 5 other Vulcans sitting here who saw us. Way to keep a secret. Alright. Here comes the deep dive into the sewage stink of insanity. Here's where I have to bring up how we fix their brains. Okay, spoilers for Star Trek 3. A Catra transfer is a rare thing. Okay? In fact, it was entirely in the realm of lore and potentially mythology for Vulcans. The idea of transferring a Catra to another body, let alone transferring it back. This was something that could be an operation for Vulcan elders, taking place on Vulcan. There was a chance it wouldn't work. High stakes, dangerous, and undertaken by Sarek himself in the plot of Star Trek 3. This endeavor to return Spock's Catra to his body, we'll say. Not going to spoil it too much. But what we learned in Star Trek 3, that film, was that Catra was not a well understood thing. Okay? But now, Dr. Mbenga is just capable of switching Catras as a purely medical operation, using some kind of sea urchin paste. Are you joking? They've done that now, and now one would have to assume that Catra transfer is now a part of the Enterprise's computer. They didn't just delete the hard drive. They didn't reformat it, did they? Once you do it, you do it. What we do to one, we do to all. Okay? Our ships talk to each other. And if this ship undergoes a refit or not, I have to imagine that people on board are going to know what Catra is now. Mbenga knows. Chapel knows. Pike knows. I mean, likely the Federation is going to know by the time Star Trek 3 rolls around. So surely we didn't have to go back to Vulcan and do all this mumbo-jumbo to get it to happen in Star Trek 3. Why did we have to walk on Star Trek 3? I was prepared to accept this episode as just some kind of classic body swap episode, as long as we didn't say the word Katra. But we said Katra. We said Katra transfer. Okay? That's a big problem. Mbenga, I'm sure he's still alive in Star Trek 3. Like, he was alive in TOS. Maybe he did die and I'm just forgetting. Do you know? So do you see how that kind of dissolves, evaporates, eviscerates Star Trek 3? I have to imagine that they've seen it. They're talking about Katra. Did they just look it up? Did they, worst case scenario, they watched the movie and then said, man, for this plot we wanted to write anyway, we have to change these things to make it make sense. Disastrous way of making a show, by the way. Especially Star Trek. This is the plot we wanted to write. Spock switches body was T'Pring. How can we make that happen? Well, I watched this movie called Star Trek 3, and they had this thing called Katra. Yeah, we can do that. But it said in the movie that Katra, and especially a transfer of Katra, was very rare and possibly not even real. Okay? It's kind of like Vulcan mythology. Can we really just use that in the sick bay of the Enterprise before TOS? Let's just do it. Who cares? Well, I care. And I'm sure you care as well. Especially because we didn't really gain anything. Most of the time, you'll find that when we go back on canon, we retcon things, or worst case, we step on previously established lore, we don't really gain much. What did we get out of this? The fact that a Katra transfer was already done before Star Trek 3? Who cares? Why did we have to do that? Make it something else. Just make up a new Vulcan word. It's better than saying Katra. I find a running theme in the background of these Strange New Worlds episodes is that they can mostly be fixed and brought up to TOS standards with only a small bit of rewriting, a few little bits of replotting, and just a few touches of salt and pepper here and there. But we're going ahead with these interesting scripts that break lore, break canon, for no benefit. If you're going to break canon, you better gain something out of it, let me tell you. And this ain't it, Chief. So, we do get our Katras transferred back into the correct bodies by Dr. Mbenga. Thanks, Mbenga. And we kiss and make up with each other, and yes, we did learn what it was like to be in each other's bodies on behalf of T'Pring and Spock. Even if we're not really supposed to be seeing each other for a while. How are they going to explain that one? Or will they try? Maybe they shouldn't try. If they tried to explain why Spock hadn't seen T'Pring in so long in TOS, maybe it would just end up being contrived. Maybe we all just better forget TOS now. Forget actual reality. Just throw it in the garbage. You know. I sound like I'm really down on this episode, but I'm kind of not. Because the episode, regardless of these things, ends up just being baseline fun. But there's something pulling at me here. There's something pulling at the sweater of this episode, threatening to unravel it. That being what we did with Katra and the lore surrounding it. Moving on to Plot C, involving Una and La'an. We brought up momentarily a few episodes ago this idea of Enterprise Bingo. It's some kind of ritual you go through when you're on the Enterprise to do things that are a little bit dangerous, a little bit risky, and a little bit worthy of being busted down in rank, we'll say. It's not a good idea to shoot people with a phaser, even on the lowest setting, just for fun. Don't do that. Needless to say, that's on the bingo list, and it is a list. My studies of ancient Earth bingo games was that you had to fill out some kind of square. This just looks like a list of things that you do to say that you've done them. For what? Clout? For fun? Doesn't look like bingo to me. It looks more like just a list. Okay? They find this out after they catch people trying to breach the airlock to go what is known as signing the Scorch. The Scorch being a tiny piece of hull plating that's the oldest piece of the Enterprise that hasn't been replaced. And I don't know why they call it a Scorch. This is just another fascination that they have, these writers, with coming up with a cool name for things like the Burn, the Red Angel, the Dark Matter Anomaly, the Scorch, which sounds a lot like the Burn, now that I mention it. I was hoping beyond hope that the Scorch was actually going to be the rust ring that's around the total circumference of the saucer section of the Constitution-class Enterprise. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look up a picture of the Enterprise, and there's like a brown discoloration on top of it, in a ring around it radially. I always wondered what that was. I was hoping that they were going to call that the Scorch or something, and maybe it was because of some strange accident, but that's not what it was. Apparently the Scorch is just one panel. Somehow I think there may have been a disconnect between the writing staff and the people doing the CGI. The writer said the Scorch, and the people working on the Enterprise model just said, just make it a panel. They won't notice. We don't have time to fix it anyway. So, Enterprise Bingo revealed to them in a funny way involving a rather unfitting nickname for Una. People are beaming away and inadvertently reveal that Una is referred to by the lower decks as where fun goes to die. It has been my experience that so far, in this and in Discovery, Una has been portrayed as a fun character. I had no inclination that she was unfun, or where fun went to die. It seems like something that was just invented for this episode, or perhaps that descriptor was meant for Leanne, who actually doesn't seem fun at all. Although in this episode I found myself in total agreement with her, when she mentioned that she could be alone with the thrum of the warp core and be totally in heaven. For once, we're in agreement. Maybe we could be fast friends, me and Leanne, listening to the warp core, as well as doing other stuff. Wink, wink. Maybe not. Leanne and Una, in an endeavor to get closer to the crew, tried to complete Enterprise Bingo on their own. Again, it's hijinks, quote unquote, shooting each other with a phaser, trying to what do they do? Put somebody in a transporter and try to transport gum into their mouth or something. It's visually amusing, although cartoonish and bordering on stupid. They captured people trying to sign the Scorch going EVA, only to have themselves go EVA without suits, mind you. In an endeavor to one-up the previous people who got caught trying to sign the Scorch, they walk out onto the hull of the Enterprise with a force field around them, and it's all very silly. Just put the EVA suits on, guys. I wonder what the behind-the-scenes explanation for that is. Did Una and Leanne just not want to put on the suits that day? They walk out, and I know they're trying to one-up the previous people, but to me it wasn't worth it to see people walk around on the hull, on the outside of the hull, unassisted, like their Q and TNG. Yeah, remember that time? Yuck. Not for me. Provided an interesting visual, though, I will say. So, they do, like, dressing down. They dress down like the two characters who were trying to go EVA beforehand, breaching the airlock. And they're calling, like, good cop, bad cop, and Leanne wants to be bad cop, and she really looks like she's enjoying it. Again, the acting's top-notch. It's just what they're doing that's stupid. They look like they're having so much fun teasing these characters. Ensign, crewman, whatever they were. And I'd be lying if I didn't say I was smirking and enjoying it a little bit. But it was decidedly not Enterprisey. Let's just say that much. Bad cop, good cop. Who needs a bad cop? What does that achieve? The writers apparently thought it was a good idea. Me, not so much. So there's our 3 plots out of the way. So, in summation, the Rongovians appear. Spock botches negotiations with them because his mind is messed up and replaced with T'Pring. La'an and Una are trying to get closer to understanding the mentality of the crew by partaking in what is known as Enterprise Bingo. And then Pike patches up negotiations with the Rongovians, saving the day. The episode seems simple. The finer things kind of work, but the big strokes, the big ideas, with regards to Catra, that's a big fail for me. Musically, the episode was fantastic. At the beginning, we even got to hear some classic TOS music in the duel between, Spock and Spock in the dream sequence at the beginning. A fantastic way to start the episode and to set up the themes. Visually, I thought it was beautiful. Lots of scenes of the Enterprise through a wraparound window, scenes of the Rongovian sailor ship. It was fantastic. And we got to go onto land on the space station. Okay? Seeing Jupiter through the window, water here, space out there, fishing. What more could you ask for? Other than more time with Mbenga to go fishing. Philosophically and morally and thematically, we're hitting the nail on the head. Every single plot line in this episode was trying to get into the mind of someone else, okay? Spock is trying to get into the mind of T'Pring. Pike is trying to get into the mind of the Rongovians. And Una and La'an are trying to get into the mind of people lower down on the pecking order than they are on the Enterprise. And we all come out of it a little wiser and a little bit more friendly and understanding on the other side. The beauty of being able to see something from someone else's point of view. It's very important for Federation politics and diplomacy. And it's exemplified in this episode. To conclude, I would say this episode is better than nothing, worse than the previous one, and had it not been for Catra sneaking into this episode, I could have given it a 6.5, but I can't now. We're setting a disturbing precedent for the day when we are going to totally eliminate TOS. I can feel it coming. William Shatner's still alive. Maybe he'll live to see it. The day when we finally just start remaking TOS straight up and saying, no, this is how it went. Remember Star Trek Picard Season 1? Remember when Picard walked into that building and he saw a hologram of the Enterprise? And he looked up and he saw the Galaxy class that looked like the Galaxy class, but the Constitution class he looked like the Discovery era Constitution class. You think that was for nothing? You think that meant nothing? You think that was just a one-off thing they did for fun? Or do you think that was subtle priming the pump, so to say, to get us to accept that, no, this is TOS? I don't accept it. This isn't TOS. Picard went on board the TOS bridge in the episode Relics of TNG. That's all that need be said. All these factors in play, I'm going to have to give this episode a 5.5. It's slightly better than nothing, if only for the hijinks we get up to, the comedy of errors, and a few fun character building scenes. Overall, in the grand scheme of things, you can probably skip it. Nothing really hits home super hard, nothing really to take away, but for the uninitiated, they may have a fun time. For those of you who are initiated, you may not have a fun time, as you may view it as stepping on the toes of a very good Star Trek movie, that being Star Trek 3. When we're making a prequel, you have to be careful not to cause the people in the future to look stupid. Let's say today I'm fixing a problem. I need to fix A. So I discover B. B allows me to fix A. I'm hailed as a genius. Hooray. We do a prequel about my life. Somebody who lived before me had the problem A, but they discovered C, and it turned out C fixed the problem a lot better than B did. And C is entered into the history books. Fast forward to today. Why didn't I see C? Why didn't I use C to fix A? I had to invent B. Am I stupid? You'll find yourself asking that kind of question a lot about prequels in Star Trek, and especially with Strange New Worlds. Well, I'm Lieutenant Mark, and it's been nice seeing you, but I gotta disappear. Hold on while I put my really ugly, plasticky looking green captain's wraparound on. Yeah, I'll go do that right now. Hit me up with that plasticky looking cheap dollar store wraparound. Give me a break. So long.